The Shadow, the Knight of Darkness, a spectral sleuth with the mental abilities of a Sherlock Holmes and the physical abilities of a Houdini, began being a media sensation in 1931 and became a major influence on the creation of Batman. Our Passion Project Kickstarter campaign is for the 50th anniversary edition of Gangland's Doom, The Shadow of the Pulps by Frank Eisgruber Jr., the first nonfiction book about the Shadow ever published. The book dives into detail about the Shadow's identities, his agents and allies, the Shadow's sanctum, villains he has faced, his international travels, and more, including the author's unique insights about the Shadow, which are not available elsewhere. Out of print now for over a decade, Gangland's Doom has never looked as striking as in our planned 50th anniversary edition, which will be available in both hardcover, trade paperback, and high-resolution digital versions. We are completely overhauling the graphic design of the book, making it more readable and adding extra features such as a new Shadow author interview. Once we reach our first stretch goal, we will add half a dozen full-page chapter illustrations created especially for this 50th anniversary edition. Plus, we have thrilling extras and add-ons for our campaign backers. Help support the creation of this incredible 50th anniversary edition of Gangland's Doom, The Shadow of the Pulps, by becoming a backer of our Kickstarter campaign today. Thanks for your support, and please spread the word about our campaign.
Hold on.
I can hear you, Steve.
Everybody froze. I don't. Oh,
Oh, and
back
unfortunately,
again.
I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are we not? Is this like the last one where we're on hold until he comes to us?
Yeah, but I couldn't hear a thing he was saying. Can you?
No, I can't hear anything.
But you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Check,
Now I
check,
can
check.
hear
We're
you.
back rocking and rolling. I was having some trouble there. We can hear you now. Steve and Tim, pleasure having y'all on the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Y'all have got an awesome project that y'all have got going on here. It revolves around a iconic franchise, comic books, movies, and beyond. Well, tell everybody a little bit about what's going on with y'all's project. I believe it starts with a pulp fictional vigilante hero.
Yes, that's true. So the Shadow has been around for almost a century, not quite, but 90 plus years. And he's been in novels, magazines, television, radio, film, toys and collectibles, just across the gamut of media. And back during the pandemic, I was reading some Shadow novels and decided I thought there must be a group of Shadow enthusiasts who have a publication of some kind. And I looked, and no, there wasn't. So I started reaching out to people like Tim, and we put together a 60 to 70 page journal. Comes out around 3 times a year, called The Shadowed Circle. We've also done a book called The Shadowed Circle Compendium, which
Very cool.
right up here.
Oh, wow, that's a big old nice book. I love the artwork on that. Wow.
Yeah, this is a nice big 8.5 by 11. The journal is about 7 by 10. Looks like this.
Oh, nice. Very cool.
And they're both in print and digital. And then right now we have a Kickstarter that started this morning for the 50th anniversary of a book called Gangland's Doom, The Shadow
There
of the
it is. Classic
That's
Shadow.
the original. Yeah, that's the original booklet that was done in '74. It's been published twice since then, but we're doing a complete makeover.
That's awesome.
Graphic layout, adding some interviews and other features. So for the 50th anniversary. So that's what started this morning.
That's awesome. And yet, where's the Kickstarter? On Kickstarter, I believe you said, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Put that link, get that all set up in the description and pump that for y'all. So
Great.
I got to ask you, Steve, and also Tim, what kind of got you into this pulp era, like Vigilante? And The Shadow is very iconic, as you were saying, and it's on radio and TV and comics over like almost 100 years. What brought you and gravitated to that particular hero?
Good question.
Well, I can speak for myself. So when I was a kid, we actually had non-chain grocery stores. That tells you how old I am. And the grocery store would sell 3 coverless comics for 25 cents.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
And so you went to the grocery store. If you help mom out, you got a comic book. And so I started collecting Batman and Detective Comics at 8 or 10 or whatever.
Very cool.
And over time, I had quite a few. And my mother was from the Depression era, right? So she grew up with old time. For her, it was just radio. In the 80s, it became old time radio. And she said, well, if you like Batman so much, you really would love The Shadow. And that was, I think, before really the internet. And I was like, The Shadow? What kind of name is that? Batman, Superman, Spider-Man. And so I don't quite know how I found out, but that in one of the old Batman comics, the Shadow had made a guest appearance. So I went to an old-timey used comic book store. You know, the old school ones that were really kind of, you're almost scared to go into them. As opposed to today, they're all bright and shiny and well lit.
Glossy prints on all covers.
That's right. That's right. And I found the Shadow, and then the old time radio comeback was along, and so you know, for those of us who are watching today in 2024, there was this thing called cassette tapes. So old time radio.
They're coming back. Actually.
Yeah, they're retro good.
Old time radio started bringing back the Shadow, and of course I gobbled them up wherever I could find them, and then my mind was blown away that above and beyond being in a comic and being on old time radio, there were actually novels. Now, I'm ashamed to say I didn't figure that out until quite a long time. I mean, I didn't read pulp novels until I came across on the same street, but not in the same area. Used bookstore. They had all the Doc Savages, so I gobbled those up. I gobbled up the Avenger because it was by the same author, right?
Right.
And then that striking Steranko cover. In fact, I still have my original well-read, beat-up paperback, and I read that, and it was game over. The writing style appealed to me, the mysteries, the twist within twists, and then once Anthony Tolan and Will Murray started cranking out authorized re-releases, you know, 2 novels per edition, I was just blown away. I was ultimately hooked. I've always been interested in Art Deco and the 1920s and 1930s.
Yes, well.
And the Shadow is definitely of that era. We could talk later about whether or not I think he would work in the modern era, but certainly he just appeals to me, right? The intellectual game, right? All the clues are there. Can you figure it out? I like it.
That's right. What about you, Steve?
Well, I was around 10 years old, and my brother, who's about 5 years older than me, started working in bookstores.
Okay.
And brought home one day these books with incredible covers. These were Doc Savage books with James Bama covers, Bantam. And I started reading them and got interested. And then, you know, many decades later, I picked them up again. And I picked up this book by Lester Dance, who wrote most of the Doc Savage novels, that was a Shadow novel. And I'm like, really? Oh, that's interesting. So I read that. Walter Gibson rewrote or rearranged parts of it. And after and after I finished that one, I started diving into Shadow novels. Now this is late. This was during the pandemic, actually, but I started really diving into the Shadow novels. I'd read a few before. And what appeals to me about him, the same kind of stuff that appeals to me about Sherlock Holmes, actually.
I love Sherlock Holmes.
He's this incredible thinker and planner. And he has ways of seeing that other people don't perceive in the same way. And Gibson puts a lot of twists and turns into his novels, so that at times you don't know really who's going where, and sometimes you don't even know who's a villain and who's not.
True. Did you ever watch the old Basil Rathbone Black and White? Yeah, solid.
Yeah, those are great.
So being kind of like, so you mentioned Shadow was in Batman at one point. There's some similarities between those two characters. Were y'all fans of Batman either before or after? And what kind of things that you take from the Shadow, like you mentioned, maybe the modern day, could apply by both characters in the modern day, you know, either one, Shadow or Batman, or somebody in that ilk of kind of a detective solving mysteries, kind of with the Sherlock Holmes. So what do you think that could be applied in not just modern day comics, maybe if somebody have existed in modern day life now?
That's an interesting question. Well, certainly the scholarship of Anthony Tolan and Will Murray clearly show that the very first Batman novel was a line for line, scene for scene, image for image ripoff, unauthorized adaptation of a Ted Tinsley Shadow novel, Case of Chemical Syndicate. In the modern era, this is a hot topic on shadow, social media.
Mhm.
Many people believe that the shadow cannot exist in the current era, and I disagree. I think I'm fascinated, and I like to be steeped in, for example, the '94 Baldwin movie of the
It was
shadow.
pretty good. I
I
love
love
that.
the costuming and the sets and the era. So I certainly think we could do that. But your question was whether or not the shadow could exist today, and the answer is, of course, he could.
Yes,
Because when you read the shadow novels, what Walter B. Gibson wanted to do was to create a modern scientific detective. And we look back in 2024 and look at these novels written in the 30s and 40s and say, well, that's not modern. But it was cutting edge at the time that
Yeah.
Walter Gibson was writing it. He was using audio surveillance on something called a dictograph. He was doing a crime scene investigation. He was working a source network against all the adversaries. So you could very much do that today. And I even think that you could keep the Shadow's identity a secret the way they do it today. I'm not swayed by the argument that, well, they're ATM cameras and ring cameras and DNA. And let me tell you something. Crime happens every day, all across the world, certainly all across the United States.
Yeah.
People don't get caught.
Right.
So if there was a character like the Shadow who was a master of men, who was trained and motivated, and he wanted to stay undiscovered, then he would stay undiscovered. Absolutely no doubt.
And you could do it either way, really. I mean, you could do it as a modern day, or you could do a period piece. That would be quite interesting. Either one could work well.
You mentioned like the source network, and now you've got social networks and media and technology.
Sure.
If there were a modern day shadow, the network of people, and it's kind of like his own social network in a way, in a sense, in the old 30s and 40s pulps. What do you think technology, and what technologies would there be applied? Maybe like somebody has maybe like an app or a technology that could use an algorithm to lie detect, tell if people are lying, or all kind of what kind of
could be
stuff could be applied to that. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that anything that exists in the real world, or that is maybe one or two generations up, so it's within the realm of possibility. Anything in popular science, anything in popular mechanics, is something that a modern day shadow could do. And one of the reasons I say that is not everyone knows when Walter B. Gibson got handed this assignment, he was under some time pressure. And he had just finished writing 2 books about Harry Houdini's methods, his escapes and his magics. And in fact, Walter Gibson was part of Harry Houdini's inner circle. He helped Harry Houdini with his crusade against fraudulent spiritualism. And they used modern scientific methods at that time. So one of the methods that Houdini used was he had a series of clandestine agents, people that would appear in disguise under fraudulent names for the sake of getting inside these scams where people were being ripped off. And it's not so simple as to say, well, Walter Gibson just cut and pasted, but he was inspired by that and took it to a new level. Now, your question about how to integrate modern technology, well, you still have to have people, right? So the shadow may communicate via social networking apps instead of calling in to Burbank, but there's going to be a guy in the chair. In fact, in one of our past editions, or one of our past issues of the journal, I explore what is referred to in modern cinema as the guy in the chair. Right. So if you look at the Mission Impossible movies, there's someone in the background always helping out, or
Like
even in the
little
Spider-Man
recording
movies.
they have Mr. Ethan Hunt, Mr. Phelps, the little recording.
That's right. There's always someone in the background. It's a great literary device for movies and stories, for things to happen off camera to carry the action forward. The hero can be busy doing hero stuff. But you could do the same thing with apps. If you look at the modern version, the most recent version of Matt Reeves' The Batman, okay, that's a crime procedural noir detective story. It's just that one of the characters happens to dress up like a bat, right?
Pretty
you
true.
could do a version like that with the Shadow. He knew forensics. He knew how to use crime scene, the cutting edge crime scene technology, such as the high definition contact lenses, so he could pick up everything and play it back later. And the use of alternate light sources, UV primarily, to pick up various clues, blood spatter, etc. All of that could be part of the shadow. I would say two other things come to mind now that you've got my mind going on it. One would be a technology that's in use. It's extraordinarily effective. Why it isn't used more, I don't know, and that is called Shot Spotter. So if I'm the shadow and I know that there's an area where there's going to be some gangland activity going on, what Shot Spotter does is it keys into the sound waves from gunfire. And it immediately alerts the police.
Interesting.
Shots fired in this location. So I would think the shadow would have that on occasion. The other thing that I think you would make extensive use of would be cameras, Bluetooth, wireless cameras, and drones. I think the shadow would use the heck out of drones.
That'd be awesome.
And why not?
Cool. What kind of technologies do you think would be applicable to a modern day shadow, Steve?
Well, definitely. I mean, black drones at night would work really well. Doing infrared black drones awesome. that would pick up both images and heat signatures. And I think whether it was a modern day story or a period piece story, the shadow at times touched into science fiction.
Yep.
So there were the classic story called The Black Hush, about a fellow who developed a ray. That just
ray gun, the ray cannon, or what it was.
That just blacked out. Not only did it take off all electricity, but you couldn't see. Literally, it just would black out vision. Period. And then people could do tremendous crimes. But there's that. There's in the novels, robots will show up at various times. Disintegration rays will show up. Different types of touching onto science fiction and mixing science fiction and crime.
There was a movie from like the early '90s, Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow.
Great movie.
Yeah, it's amazing. That kind of has like a little bit of that homage to the shadow, a little bit. But he flies an airplane, of course. Well, speaking of that, if there's going to be a modern, like a new film or a television series, might even be better in my opinion. First question, who would you want to play the shadow? And second question, what would you want to see from that as an updated version, like for the modern age and that kind of entertainment world? We're starting with you, Steve.
That's interesting. Who would I have play him? People are always talking about that, and they talk about both. They probably talk about more about dead actors than live actors. Interesting. I mean, Basil Rathbone has come up. Numerous times.
He's probably dead by now, right? He's long gone.
Because of his face, and he has a classic face like that. So I don't know who we'd have. I don't know who we'd have play him. But I would definitely play on the piece of not knowing who he was.
Right.
And having, in the radio series, he's Lamont Cranston. In the novel series, Lamont Cranston, he borrows his identity at times. It'd be very cool to do things like you'd have Lamont Cranston in episodes and you wouldn't know whether that was the shadow as Lamont Cranston or the real Lamont Cranston. You'd have no idea. It'd be fun to play with a lot of the identity stuff that way.
That'd be cool.
And you could do a great television series.
Oh yeah, I think it should be a TV show for sure. That'd be even better, like a real big budgeted, but with a long, 10 episodes, 3 or 4 seasons would be amazing. What about you, Tim? Who do you think should play the shadow, like living or dead, or probably living?
I would say the shadow. Who is playing the shadow should be a mystery the entire first season. I agree with you.
That's great. I love that.
Television series would be the way to go.
You mean
one
not
thing
show
that the
him?
shadow had well in advance of anybody else was he had young and old. He had men and women. He had multiple ethnicities. It was all about who could operate in the environment where he needed them to be. So in that respect, you wouldn't have to make a lot of changes. Right. You could have a wide array of people playing. And I would actually go so far as to say, just putting this out there, the shadow is actually Ken Allard, right?
Ooh, okay.
But he pretends to be Lamont Cranston. He pretends to be Phineas Twombly. He pretends to be
Henri.
I'm blanking. A number of people. And you know what? You should have different actors playing that role so that the audience is never really sure. Well, now, wait a second. Who is the Shadow? Like, just have a completely different actor. Don't do, an actor in makeup. Just have a completely different actor and operate the way that Walter Gibson did in the first novels, which was the Shadow was in the background.
Right. More
He
of a
was a
background
puppet master pulling the strings. Nobody really knew. And even his aides don't know.
I think I have a couple people I think would be cool for a little bit older version. If y'all haven't, maybe you should check it out, the Fallout television series. Walter Goggins would be an amazing portrayal, maybe a little bit older Shadow. But believe it or not, if you've seen the series Masters of the Air, it's a Steven Spielberg, kind of like the World War II show. The guy he was the same actor that played Elvis. He'd be a great actor to play that.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. He would. You're right.
It'd be a great. Those two guys would be an amazing, kind of deal. You could throw in some other characters in there, throw them in occasionally. But
didn't that actor also play
he played Elvis? I know that.
the villain in the second Dune movie?
Yes, he played Thane or whatever, the guy who battled Paul Atreides.
Yeah,
great character.
You could also do something where you take a completely unknown actor, and for the first 2 or 3 episodes, you really don't know who he is. You have no idea. Maybe in the 3rd episode, suddenly you credit them or something. But
if you really wanted to spice things up, you could even throw a curveball in there and have like a Batman show up or something like that. Like an homage to the old days would be really cool.
Yeah.
So I got to ask y'all both about this Kickstarter, the overall encompassing, message of the Shadow. What is y'all's ultimate goal beyond publishing the book? Are you going to do like something else beyond that? Or what's the message of what y'all are trying to do for both of y'all to deliver to the fans and beyond, starting with you, Tim?
Well, when we first started, I honestly thought that we were, and we still are, fans writing for fans.
Right.
But as we did more issues and got more feedback and got such glowing reviews from so many different places, to my surprise, there are people that are just now discovering the Shadow, just now discovering the movie serials, the radio, the books, the comics. And so now my personal goal is I want to increase our subscriber list. Okay. No one's driving a Rolls Royce out of writing a fanzine about a pulp character. But I want to spread the news about what great writing there is, and how much fun it is to know about these characters. There are 282 novels written by Gibson alone, and 325 overall. That's just the novels. There's so much to dive into, so much history. So for me, I want to, I want people to remember. If they don't remember, then I want them to learn about the pulp era. I will tell you that I was, I don't think I was a pulp snob. I would think I was very limited in my pulp knowledge. I remember early on one of the social media posts, I put something up about Dime Detective. And it had a nice logo, and I said, "Oh, that's great. They could bring back the Shadow." And Anthony Tolan was very kind to me. He's like, "No. The Detective Story Mystery Hour from Street and Smith. Dime Detective was an entirely different publisher." I had no idea of all the different types of pulps.
Oh, there's tons,
publishers and everything. So I want to share all. The fact that the Smithsonian American History Museum doesn't have even if it's a small permanent exhibit about mass media in the United States. From the 20s until the 40s, it was the pulps.
Smithsonian, watch this, check it out. That's right. Yeah, I went down to when I was a kid, I was about 10 years old. I'd never been to Smithsonian. My father took us to Washington, me and my brother and sister and mother. And I got to go. It's kind of cool. So I got to go. They had the Star Wars before the prequels and before the new ones. Just the original 3 trilogy films. The Star Wars, it was called Myth and Magic exhibit. And it was more like, not pulp era, but it had kind of the, Star Wars kind of homage actually to pulp era with Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. To see the intricate models and miniatures and all from that were really cool. And it was also before they restored the Starship Enterprise in the Smithsonian. They had a phaser in there, Fonzarelli's leather coat from season 1 of Happy Days, Howdy Doody Dog, all the Americana things. But like you said, there's no isolated one exhibit. I think that'd be really cool to do that. Really neat. And I think they also need to have some comic books in there because these pulp paper, it's pulp. It doesn't last forever. And the more valuable it is based on the condition, of course, the rarity and all that jazz.
That's right.
Yeah.
Comic books. I got to ask both of y'all a question that means to me. Comic books, and especially comic book art, has become so like literally like fine art. What do you both see the future of pop culture, pop art that is in the future? You think it'll just be more and more and more collectible, or there'll be new stuff? Like I know you get digital stuff. What are y'all's version? I like these NFT things, all this wild stuff. What are y'all's thoughts?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, one of the things I love about doing the journal is that we come across both writers and illustrators who people have never heard of,
Right.
who are incredible. There's a fellow named Marcin Nowacki in Romania
Oh wow.
who's sent us a bunch of incredible drawings. He's actually doing the paperback cover of Gangland's Doom that the Kickstarter.
Wow. Very cool.
And he's just an amazing artist. Another one called Rover, who we've had, who does very different takes on the shadow. And that's true of writing too. There's a fellow in Brazil named Arthur Penteado who's written some fantastic articles for us. So one of the things I love is just reaching out and coming across artists and writers internationally, all over the place, who love the shadow and who want to play and participate.
Cool.
Yeah.
What about you, Tim?
Well, Owen, I'm looking around my sanctum, and I've got some Wilfredo Torres up on the wall. I've got some Sterenkos,
Nice.
some Matt Wagner, one of the greatest shadow artists of all time, Mike Kaluta, and my friend Joe DeVito, who's just an extraordinarily talented artist and sculptor, above and beyond the shadow. He does incredible work. I remember when digital comics came along, and there was great fear that would be, when tapes came along, everyone was concerned, the artists are going to go bankrupt because everyone's going to bootleg their stuff. And now here we are in 2024, and I think the artists are probably even more wealthy than they were previously, because now they can reach more people.
Right.
And then I'll bring it all full circle and say, when one of the greatest movies of all times was being conceptualized, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh man. Yeah.
George Lucas's idea, improved, some would say, by Steven Spielberg, brought to life by Steven Spielberg, Harrison Ford, Karen Allen, etc. Who did they turn to visualize, before all the incredible stunt people, before the costumers, before the production team found the sets? They turned to Jim Steranko to distill down the essence of what that hero looked like, the pulp hero from the serial era, and make it iconic. And what Steranko painted is exactly what we all think of. And so you say, Tim, what's the future of comics? I say, it's some talented artists out there, like the ones that Steve mentioned, or some we haven't even met yet. Maybe they haven't been born yet. And they're going to have a vision of seeing things that escape us, right? Because I'm not an artist, or not much of an artist. They might see something differently. Jim Steranko saw the comics medium differently. It's taken more than 50 years for the comics industry to catch up to Jim Steranko.
Yeah, pretty much.
If they have,
yeah. So I would say comics are going to be alive and well. I enjoy digital comics. I like being able to send our digital. We're the only pulp journal exclusively dedicated to the shadow.
Nice.
And I'm so pleased to be able to send high resolution digital copies all around the world through the miracle of the internet.
That's super cool.
And that doesn't in any way take away from the artwork that comes in, or the artwork that's done for us by Joe Booth, who's an exceptionally talented guy.
Oh, wow. There you go. That's awesome.
that's
So,
a joke.
what will technology bring us?
Rover illustration, very different, but gorgeous.
I like the kind of like the spy versus spy look on that. That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yep.
So wrapping up, we got a few more minutes. We're going to put this on Spreaker too. We're also, believe it or not, simulcasting on YouTube and Facebook and X and Twitch and all beyond. I wanted to ask y'all, in y'all's own words, what do you want to see for the future of just comic pop culture or vigilantes, particularly, including like Batman? You've even got people like, the Shadow. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, even Venom, that's coming out. What would you like to see in that category? What would you like to see the future of that particular motif?
Good question.
So I can tell you that when Walter Gibson was writing for Street and Smith, the editorial direction at that time was to steer clear of certain topics, right? So, for example, they didn't really get into realistic organized crime.
Yeah.
They didn't get into, social class or things of that nature. And I don't know that you want that to overshadow the detective, pun intended, overpower the story that you're trying to tell.
Right.
But if you look at some of the work of, let's say, Knives Out, if you've watched those movies.
Yep, both of them.
Yep, they were great. They can
Daniel
tell
Craig.
a story, and in the background, they might highlight, different social topics so that you can still show that product is of its era, but it's still extraordinarily entertaining and very engaging. That's what I'd like to see, because there's not only are there copyrighted, trademarked heroes like the Shadow and Doc Savage and others, a talented writer and creative team could come up with a generic Avenger of some kind, with a gun, without a gun. It could be modern day. It could be set in the 20s. It could be set in the 30s. Sure. The sky is the limit. But they're interesting stories to tell, and they can be made in the modern era with modern sensibilities without being heavy-handed. I think if it's too heavy-handed, the audience will turn it off. Right? Sometimes you just want to unplug. The first movie that I ever saw in a movie theater when I was 8 years old was the first Star Wars movie, now known as Episode 4.
Nice.
And the joy and enthusiasm I had of my dad taking me to a movie for the first time ever lasts with me all these many years. I'm just a few years older than 8 now, and I still have very fond memories of that. And I think out there in the world, there is a young man or a young woman and, their brother, their sister, their aunt, their uncle, their mom, their dad. Let's go see a fun adventure with a mystery to untangle. So I would like to see the future of pulps as don't let it fall away. You pointed out pulps are almost built to go away. They're built on cheap quality paper. They're disintegrating.
Right.
I have just a few over on my bookshelf. There are other collectors that have mint condition originals. Those are going away, right? I do not want these incredible adventures that can be simplistic, but they're fun. Right? I want the world to recognize that we can have fun. We can set aside our squabbles and our concerns, and we can just lose ourselves in a fun adventure story for a little while. That's what I want.
I always wanted to see like the. Have you ever seen the Rocketeer, the movie?
Yes,
great movie.
It's funny. So when Campbell got that role, my grandfather was friends with his dad back in the day, and he came over to his dad and was like, "Hey, I'm going to be the Rocketeer." And he's like, "The Rocket what?" He had to explain to him the whole lineage of like how it was a pulp character, and it's an absolutely amazing film. I'd love to see maybe him pop up in the Shadow.
Did you read the Rocketeer original comics?
No, I did not. I've always wanted to get some.
Doc Savage and the Shadow homages, pastiches, make a guest appearance, and the artwork and writing of Dave Stevens is perfect, absolutely perfect.
What issues were those? Like the 1930s or?
No. They were probably the 80s. I think.
Okay,
Pacific Comics.
80s Shadow with the crossover.
No, it was the Rocketeer. The Rocketeer.
Wow. Okay.
Had the Shadow and Doc Savage in the back.
90s, maybe. What year was the movie? What was the Rocketeer movie?
91, I believe. 90 or 91.
Was it after the movie or before, you think?
That's a good question, actually.
Oh, it was before.
It was before.
It was before, yeah.
Late 80s, mid 80s.
Yeah.
So I remember Timothy Dalton was still young in that. It was right after he played James Bond.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah. So in the comics, in the Rocketeer comics,
one thing that movie I think did well.
Ann Brooks, the Shadow, Make it
One
so you
thing I
should
think
track
that-
those down. They're cheap.
that movie did well that I'd like to see is a mix between a really good mystery that draws you in, but then also going into character stories and finding out, just the lives of the people you're watching on screen. So it's not just, characters you throw in that are solving a mystery, but it's some life stories and a mystery. It's combined. I think that
They could even do and go as far as doing like what they did with Avengers, teaming up all these iconic characters. You can even throw in the Phantom, the
Yep.
Shadow, Batman, Rocketeer, Doc Savage, and have them like be kind of like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but like a big
Yeah.
Only
comic
better.
book idea for you.
Will
Be
Will
awesome.
Murray did two great novels combining Doc Savage and the Shadow,
Be
which
awesome.
are very good.
Well, I'm wrapping up. I first want to thank you, Stephen and Tim, for joining us.
Oh,
Check
and
out the
you.
new version of we're gonna get down there. That book right there, and Ganglin's Shadow, the awesome Shadow of the Pulps. I want to thank you guys for joining us. I will share y'all's Kickstarter. I want to bring y'all on once y'all do more goodies. You have a beautiful day, and this is Owen with SciFiction bringing you awesomeness and awesomeness. The Shadow knows. The Shadow knows. That's right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. You have a beautiful
Take
day.
care.
You too.